أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء وأعز المرسلين، حبيب إله العالمين العبد المؤيد والنور المسدد المصطفى الأمجد أبي القاسم محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد صلى الله عليه وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين. أما بعد، فيقول الحق وقوله الصدق في محكم التنزيل. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والذين يقولون ربنا هب لنا من أزواجنا وذرياتنا قرة أعين واجعلنا للمتقين إماما. صدق الله العلي العظيم. آمنا بالله ورسله. To accelerate the reappearance of our awaited Imam, Ajalullah Ta'ala Fazal Sharif, I request we recite 3 loud salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Respected scholars, brothers and sisters in Islam, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We live in an age that is thoroughly influenced and dominated by Western civilization, culture, and practices. Our youths are highly influenced and greatly impressed by the Hollywood culture, to the point that it shapes the way they dress, the way they think, the way they eat, they drink, they walk, all in a way which is considered to be required cool. And one needs to realize that the mindset of those youths that are influenced with such civilization is different than the mindset of the generation that came before them. That every generation comes is totally different in terms of mindset than the one before it. Therefore, one needs to be able to understand the factors that cause such influence, and at the same time be able to understand what are the steps to be taken to be able for solving this problem. Shaheed Mutahari rahmatullahi alayh, in his book Guiding the Youth of the New Generation, he highlights 2 main points. He says the first point that one needs to understand is that there's a gap between generations. Such influence of the culture, such influence, what it made it cause the gap between the generations, a gap between teenagers and their parents and their elders, believe it or not. The second point that one needs to understand and be able to deal with is the mindset of the youth. One would realize that when it comes to that generation gap, the first thing that one needs to understand is that those youths, they're the sons of this generation. They're not the sons of the previous generation. So the methods of da'wah that needs to be presented to them in order for the attraction to happen needs to be totally different. And since it needs to be totally different, there has to be a common understanding between the elders and the youths. True? That common understanding needs to have a certain base, that they sit together and they interact and they exchange ideas and theories. That you listen to them, you listen to what really attracts them, and you give them a chance to be able to lead. Why? You see, we have to be able to face a fact. The fact is that since we came to such a society and since we live here, if we're staying, we need to realize that we're growing old. True? So since we're growing old, that message needs to stay. And those youths are the ones that are going to be able to continue this message. They're the ones who are going to be able to lead this community later on. And they're the ones who will work for its betterment. Because the message cannot stay. And this is one of the problems that the youth suffer from when it comes to the community. Which is what? Is that sometimes, unfortunately, the communities believe that the way the amal should happen should stay. True? For example, the way it happened the year before, it's going to happen this year, and it's going to go on for the next 10 years. That this is the method, this is the tradition, and this is the culture. Unfortunately, you need to understand that the mindset of the youth is a way different. Why? The mindset of this youth, the way he describes it, Shaykh Mutahhari does, he describes it, he says that it is totally dynamic. It's totally different. Why? It's a questioning type of a mindset. That you realize nowadays, the youths always question, they always want to know why. They always repeat the same question again. Everything you present to them is indeed a question. It's said in a story that one time an old man was sitting, a father. He was sitting in the backyard with his son. And then he looked, a bird came and stood on a branch of a tree. He looked at the son and he told him, son, what is this? He said, Dad, that's a bird. A minute later, son, what is this? He said, Dad, that's a bird. A minute later, son, what is this? Then angrily the son replied, Dad, that's a bird. Stop asking. He said, subhanallah. Then the father went inside. He brought a biography, his own autograph, and then he opened it. And then he showed him that when you were at this age, you were 2 years old or 3 years old, one time I was sitting with you in the backyard. And then he was sitting on my lap. A bird came and stood on a branch. You asked me more than 10 times, Baba, what is this? So that type of a patience, that needs to be, it's a two-way street. True, and it's to happen from the elders towards the young ones, and the same thing, the vice versa. So the mindset of the youth is always questioning. It always wants to know. It's a curious mindset. The second thing is that, in their mindset is that what? Their spirit is more aggressive. That you need to realize that a youth is always more aggressive, is always willing to challenge, is always innovative. He wants something new to be presented on the table. And this is extremely important for us to understand. Why? See, Muslim philosophers have a beautiful explanation. They went into groups. Some of them believe that energy inside you, if you don't really invest in it, not only that it stays in the same level, it might degrade. So therefore you need to be able to realize that energy, and that energy needs to be totally understood. And when I say understood, I don't mean that you only accept that there is energy, no. I mean that you need to be understanding of that energy. You need to realize that what is the source of that energy. Don't panic right away when you are confronted with something new, with a new ideology. For example, when a son comes to his father and he realizes that he has a passion for football, something that you call in Canada soccer, true? He has a passion for football. The same reply sometimes you get. And personally, on a personal level, I speak to some fathers sometimes and I say, what is it? Why do you prevent your son from being a football player? No, he needs to be an engineer. He needs to be a doctor. He needs to be this. He needs to be a financial advisor. What is the problem in him being a football player? For you, for example, what you need to do, you need to be understanding, have some knowledge about it, that know if that sport is beneficial, it's good, there's nothing wrong with it. Being an athlete, nothing is wrong with it, is that if he's able to excel in such fields, that why not? Of course, let him combine it with his education. Yet do not kill such a talent, because if you kill that energy, there's another outlet. Shaheed Mutahhari says that the Western media, the mass media, opened up windows for those youths, to the point that everything they find in it is fascinating. Why? Because of their curious personality, their innovative soul, what happens is that they find everything fascinating in those windows. And by God's, only the simplest example you can see nowadays is on Facebook, for example. You get on Facebook and you see how they all express their energy, mashallah. And they express their opinions. Now obviously these are gates and windows open for them. And they present to them that everything is going to be easy and you're able to explore as much as you can. There are no boundaries around you. True? So sometimes when your son comes to you with a certain talent, be able to discover that talent. And if a wise community is a community that always able to discover the talents that they have amongst themselves. In what sense? Meaning what? You see, second time for the love of Father. You take, for example, the football player like Lionel Messi. Lionel Messi was a person who was born with Down syndrome. Imagine. with a sickness. He couldn't really properly grow. When the Barcelona scouts were once in his city, Rosario, in Argentina, they saw him playing. When they saw him playing, they invited him to play over in Barcelona. They wanted to see how would he play a European league. At that point, he was obviously 8 years old, 7 years old if I'm not mistaken. They brought him, they put him on the field. He scored 5 goals. Then they went to his father and they said, you know what, we're going to see if we'll be able to solve his problem and then maybe we'll sign him. True. At that point, his father, he speaks in the documentary. He says, at this point, I became impatient. I didn't want to wait. So what is this, my son becoming a player in Barcelona? It might not even happen. So therefore, it was a Sunday. The president of the club sat down with me. When he sat down with me, I told him, you know what? I just can't take it anymore. I'm probably going to book a ticket and go back to Argentina. He said, no, wait. We decided that we're going to sign his contract. He said, no, forget it. Maybe he'll come back one time. Maybe later on, when he grows, when he develops more. He said, no, we will sign the contract. He said, it's a Sunday, what's open? He took out a piece of napkin from his pocket, and he said, this is the signature. And that piece of napkin, imagine, it developed into signing a player that nowadays is worth 120 million euros. True? So sometimes that you need to be able to figure out that energy in the child, that talent in the child. And of course, I'm not saying let's all become athletes. Indeed not. Yet sometimes we need to be able to open up those same gates that are open up for them in the mass media. Because if we do not invest in this energy, there are so many outlets that are ready to take such an energy. And this is one of the main issues that happens with us, is that we end up losing the talents in our society. I mean, for God's sake, you would imagine if only our 12 infallible imams ruled at their time. How much do you think the amount of knowledge we would have? And how much do you think the amount of scientific advance and educational advance we would have? Rather than them, unfortunately, not being able to express all their knowledge to the public. True? So sometimes we don't need to repeat that mistake. And we have to do the same with our community members. Resulting from this introduction, we will speak inshallah tonight and we'll try to dissect 2 main factors. The first one is the responsibility that we have towards the youth. And number 2, we will speak about the upraising and educating a child. Muslim philosophers, when they speak about raising and upraising a child, what do they say? Some of them say is that child is a result of what? Is the child or the individual a result of society? Or no? Is it that society which is a result of that individual within it? The majority of them lean towards the second opinion, is that it is always that individual that forms the society, and that individual, what forms him is the family. True? And how does the family forms that individual? Is through raising and upraising. Keeping this point in mind, understanding that the way raising and upraising a child goes into 2. There is the direct raising the child, upraising, and there's the indirect one. Meaning what? The direct raising of the child is connected to the responsibility we have towards the youth. First of all, understanding that responsibility goes into 2. The first responsibility is the one which is connected to the form and the the form of how do we do action. In what sense? Meaning that if we believe that we need to take action in order for us to guide the youth, then obviously we need to put that action in a certain form. We need to have a manual, a certain schedule in order for us to work by. True? The second type of responsibility is what? Is what we say, the one that has to do more with the outcome of the effort that we put in. And how effective is the outcome? Guiding the youth through direct type of raising has to do with the second type of responsibility. Meaning you should not concentrate and stress always on the action that you've done. You should concentrate and stress on how effective the outcome of the action is. Why? Because youths look at things, just like we said earlier, they look at things in different ways. What you think might be an effort, they might consider it relative. You might think in a certain community center that, you know what, we're going to have an English speaker, or we're going to have an English program. A youth might say, yes, but you're supposed to do that. And a person should not get credit for something he's supposed to do. What needs to be happen is that we need to concentrate on the second type of responsibility, is that we need to look on how effective the effort that we put, the outcome of that effort that we put is. So what needs to happen is an evaluation. In what sense? That every time after the end of every program, whether be it Muharram, Ramadan, and hopefully more should happen. I mean, for God's sake, we have 14 infallibles. Imagine if you want to commemorate the martyrdom of each infallible and the birthday of each infallible. We'd have a full schedule all year around. And not put them all together. I mean, sometimes what really amazes me of some community centers is that the way they celebrate the birthday of the Imam is that number one, they have to wait for the weekend. Number two is that they put them all together. Or let's say there are two different Imams born in 1 month. So you know what, we'll just put them all together. And it's as if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when they were born, they said, oh Allah, please wait for the weekend. No, people are going to be free at that time. Is that why? Take advantage of these things. And this is what I was trying to say earlier. When I started my lecture, what did I say? Is that those media outlets that are able to always fill the schedule of the youth, they fill their mindset. True? Look at the devices that they invent. iPhone, iPray, iThis, iThat, iPad, I don't know what. Everything has to do with the I. Why? Because believe it or not, brothers and sisters, one very important thing you need to really reflect on. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam back in the days, what did he face? Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was faced with something called idol worshipping. In what sense? If you only look at the idol worshipping, that what they did is that they made the idol, you'd be wrong. Those idols were a reflection of themselves. And what's happening nowadays is that those eye devices are always a reflection of oneself, is that you need to believe in yourself. You are able to do anything you want, and then you can take it with you to the bed, to the bathroom. I mean, who can live without a cell phone for 1 day? This is impossible every time. And the problem does not sometimes come from the youth. The problem is sometimes comes from the parent. A parent, the first thing he does for his child, buy him an Xbox, a PlayStation, this, that, and this. I don't know this new DSL, DSI, I don't even know the definitions of all of them. Why? What you're doing is that you're getting poison to the house. Is that wait until he develops, he matures. How many parents would take their children to the public library to buy a book? No. Where I'm going is that I'm going to either Future Shop or this shop to buy a game, which is wrong. What you're doing is that you're putting that drug on the table for the child. That game, how is it going to develop his thinking? He's going to become dependent on technology. He won't be able to become innovative. True? And this is extremely important that one needs to reflect on. So the idol worshipping that was back in the days, it's transforming into this type of technological type of worshipping. Is that everything is dependent on technology. It's technology that will always answer the questions that you need. True? Not going through a book, not writing, and this is what we suffer from. Believe it or not, you want to know one of the main things we suffer from as the Muslim community in the Western world. And this is sometimes we're misquoted and understood. The amount of money and effort which is being put towards publishing book for the Western world, how much do you think it is? By God, it won't add up to zero. Do you know that? Why? The big mistake that is happening is that those books are being translated in whether Lebanon, Najaf, Syria, Iran. The translation, who is ever translating that book is a person who lives there. One of the main rules of translation is that the person needs to understand the culture of the people. He needs to understand their mindset, how they think, the slang they use, the language, the different type of grammar. You cannot present a book here to a child or a youth who's born and raised in Canada, which has been translated in Najaf. It's totally different. He's not going to sit down and read thy and thee and thou. It's totally different. What needs to happen is that those talents that we have amongst our community, we need to support them and make a budget that we need to do. You see, the sad reality is that sometimes when we look at the other schools of thought in Islam and their achievements, you would realize, oh, you know what, Saudi Arabia is paying for them. No, you'd be wrong. I personally know a sheikh on a personal level, one of my very good friends from the Sunni school of thought. I asked them once, the budget of their youth club in the city they're from, I would love to say which one it is, but I don't think he'd like it. The budget of their youth club is $60,000 a year. That's the budget of the youth club, not their community center. So imagine, I'm sure that $60,000 a year, that's a budget that we won't have for 5 years in our Shia center sometimes. It's really sad. And if we do, it's only on one certain or some certain occasions, and obviously when Fulan sometimes comes, and this is where you see all the money is shown. This is sad, by God. Is that sometimes this budget, imagine, $60,000 for a youth club, for youth programs. That's excluding the camps. And I asked them, I said, you know what, Sheikhna, but I'm sure it is from the donations that you get from outside. He said, no. By God, it's all the donations of the community. And this is why, personally, I do not believe when they say the community does not have money. No. I refuse to believe this. MashaAllah, you look at each community. You know, speaking whether all the communities which migrated to this country. I'm not going to name them all, with all due respect to all of them, and MashaAllah, they're all effective members, and they're all effective communities, and the work they do, and they're all respected, yet they all own businesses, they all own houses. If they do not believe in the spiritual growth of their children, rather than concentrate only on the physical growth of their children, then obviously they're not going to get anywhere. So what we need to do is that stress on that type of spiritual growth, is that to be able to fund them with programs, be able to pay for them, be able to always embrace them, and sometimes by God, and this is some personal experience that happened to me more than one time. You get invited to a certain community, then you would realize that it's only the youth that are being able to host the expenses of the speaker. You make the speaker really feel bad and guilty, and you make actually that, why? It is the vice versa. It is the elders and the respected community. It is the jama'at that have to be begging the speakers to let them, you know what, that we would like to pay for somebody to come and speak for you. We would have to ram you with programs. Not only sell for those 10 nights and that's it, no. Go on. And this is what I meant by the second type of responsibility, is that you have to be able to look at them, sit down with them, and examine the effect that you had as a result of your effort into action. What did really came out of it? What was the result? And what do you need for later on? So that money, that wealth that we have needs to be invested in such fields of expertise. One needs to understand this in order for us to be able to advance. So going back to what I said, is that those community centers, being able to provide this, we need to match up to what's really being presented outside to the youths. And that's one of the key points that we need to understand. True, what happens to those youths is that sometimes they interact with the outside world, on the internet, on TV, on the satellite dish, and alhamdulillah, there isn't one house that has more than, God knows, 1,000 channels, that you have so many options for haram, and look, whatever you want. And then sometimes they sit down and say, Maulana, my kids are misguided. Well, obviously they are. And I'll speak about this with the indirect type of upraising a child. That child, if you raise him on such a way, then this is what will result. Those youths that when they come and they get a glimpse of our Islamic world, our programs, our community centers, our masajid, what happens is that they get shocked. That they realize that the amount of advance is very low. There isn't any type of progress that's happening. The first year they attend Muharram, and unfortunately it takes them for the second year to come back to the community center to attend Muharram, and you realize everything is still the same. Ali ibn Abi Talib salawatullahi wa sallam. He mentions a beautiful narration. He says, one whom his 2 following days are equal is a loser. So one whom his 2 following days are equal is indeed a loser. So a person always works for the betterments, always works to advance and progresses more. True? And one whom the day, his past day, is better than his present day, is cursed. And sometimes by God, so 1 year passes and the other, and they're all the same. No progress, no young blood coming in. Those community centers, and take it from me, will never advance unless we get that young blood to be able to lead. Will never advance unless we bring them and involve them. As the famous saying says, tell me and I'll forget, show me and I'll remember, involve me and I'll understand. So you have to be able to involve them in everything and what's going on. Why? Because one day, sooner or later, these are the ones who will be taking over such places. So that's one of the key points. The other point is that in order for us to be able to expand more, look at some other communities who migrated to Canada. A lot of the communities from different countries in the world, there isn't one community that does not have an athletic club. Unfortunately, except for the Muslim community. And what I mean an athletic club for Muslim community, not an athletic club for the Khoja, an athletic club only for the Lebanese and the Iranians and this and that. I mean just an athletic club. There are some communities who migrated here, they have an athletic club. Now they have a professional football team which competes in the MLS, believe it or not. And in that football team, do you know how many Muslims there are? 4. So if we were to be thinking ahead, we need to really provide with such programs. And we really need to invest our money in such things. And sometimes what happens, the problem is the parents and the elders, they panic. You say, what do you mean an English program is going to cost me this much? We don't have budget for it. And I've said before, I think, unfortunately, we treat our community centers as convenience stores. We want to become so technical, thinking that if we put the community center on a budget, you know what, that budget, why does it only apply to Imam Hussein alayhi salam? Only applies to the majalis. It's really sad. A lot of us never put a budget when it comes to our daughters' and sons' birthdays, true? When the wife wants to go shopping, there is no budget. When a man wants to buy a new car or a new house or go on vacation, why isn't there a budget? Yet only when it comes to serving the community, there's always a budget. By God, this is a psychological disease, and I mean what I say. It is a disease. That disease needs to be removed. If it's not removed, we will never advance as a community. And I've said that and I explained before. Last night I said, why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tell Qarun at the end in his advice, as a wealthy man, and do not spread corruption? And I said because corruption requires money. In order for you to spread corruption, you need money. You need a big amount of wealth. And the same way to stop corruption, you're going to need money. There's no doubt about it. And that money, by Allah, it will grow as long as it's invested in the right way. But this is what it needs to be done. Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam, one time he was passing through the market. A man was standing selling a slave. Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam tells him, ask that man, how much do you want for the slave? He said 10. He paid him 10. When he saw that Ali ibn Abi Talib right away paid him, he said, actually, you know what? No, 50. He said, here you go, there's 50. He said, you know what? No, actually 100. Okay, here you go, there's 100. 200. Ali ibn Abi Talib, he said, at the end, Ali ibn Abi Talib told him, by God, if you ask me for 1,000 or 1,000, I'll pay you. Because I know that this money is going for a righteous cause. I just want to free one man. So sometimes when the money is going for the good cause, it is important to be generous about it. And this is why I say, do not isolate those youths and let them believe that, you know what, we're the ones who are only going to take care of ourselves. Because what will happen is this is where the separation happens in communities. This is where some people say, you know what, we're going to separate. Because we don't want to deal with the politics. We don't want to deal with the headaches and the problems. We're definitely going to separate. You need to open up those channels for them, and you need to provide them with what they ask for, obviously reasonably. And this is also puts a responsibility on the youths to be able to understand and to be able to cope with the elders. There's no doubt about it. And this is what will make this community advance. Understanding this really lets us understand what is the other type of upraising a child. And lets us understand the responsibility towards that child. You see, when it comes to forming a society, it starts with a family, and a family starts with those individuals. That child will be an effective individual one day in society. And one day he will grow up to be a youth, and understanding, by the way, the definition of the youth is not only a person who's from a certain age to another. Like, for example, that doesn't mean that he's a person from 15 to 30 or 20 to 30. No. Sheikh Wael says that a youth is that one who's an individual in such a civilization. who might be effective in that culture, who might have that same mindset, that's still a youth. For example, what happens is, let's say for example, you send one of your sons to study outside, he comes back with a different mindset. What needs to happen in this case is that he needs a jama'at. Why? It's the nature of a human being to be social. He always wants to be social. He always wants that feeling of belonging. So the first step to solve this is that what? To have those strong communities outside. So when you send your children outside in order for them to study, that they have a sense of belonging. They don't need to belong to somebody else or somewhere else. True? The second thing is that what's recommended for them is that obviously marriage. Marriage is one of the things which is extremely recommended. And that is why they say a Hausa student, when he travels and studies, one of the first things that they advise him with is that what? Get married. We need to understand that that marriage ideology needs to be implemented. If it's not implemented, trust me, there are so many gates, and sometimes half of them are in haram. And the other half, they might be in halal, but even so half of the times they're twisted. This is the problem. Marriage needs to be totally preached in our community, and it needs to be spoken about openly. You sit down sometimes, what really I don't understand is that you sit down with some parents and you speak to a child about marriage, be it permanent marriage or non-permanent marriage, for example, or they say, you know what, no, they're too young for this. Well, have you looked into their school curriculum? Do not tell me that they're young. Look into their school curriculum. For God's sake, sexual education is being taught in high schools when they're in grade 7 and now sometimes in grade 8 or 6. Makes no difference. So when you speak to them about marriage and educate them and have this open relationship with you and them, is that be able to connect with them. What is the big deal in this? No, they're too young for this. There's a lot of things that sometimes our youths are too young for. And I sometimes deal with a mindset of parents which is extremely dangerous. A mindset of a parents that are willing to let their children to travel to Cuba, to travel to Mexico, to travel to anywhere in the world in order for them to go to those resorts. But then that child, alhamdulillah, Allah blesses him, he joins the youth club, he becomes religious, and then he wants to go to ziyarah. And then that's when they go crazy. No, son, you cannot go to Iraq. You might be killed. For God's sake, you might be kidnapped in Cuba. That alcohol you've been drinking in Cuba, what is it? Isn't this a killer? Isn't this a disease? Or sometimes when their children go out on the weekends and they drink and they do everything, that's okay. Fine. You just pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for them to be guided. Yet as soon as that child says that, you know what, or that teenager says, you know what, I want to go to ziyarah. No. You might be killed in Iraq. You might be kidnapped in there. You might this might happen to you. SubhanAllah, this is one of the main issues that those youths face. Which is what? The inconsistency. And that inconsistency, unfortunately, that it just expands in our community. As a Muslim community, this is the problem that we face in the Western world. The Western mind cannot comprehend our inconsistency in applying religion. They look at one person as a practicing Muslim, they look at him as a practicing Muslim. True? Then another Muslim comes and he has his own Islam, and just like I said before, in Canada we have so many maraja, alhamdulillah, and they come and they explain to them a different Islam. True? I mean, just listen to the radio for God's sake. Sometimes when you listen to some radio shows, some people call and they say, no, hijab is not wajib in Islam. Other people call and say, no, niqab is wajib in Islam. Other people say this, other people say that. There's always this matter of inconsistency in our deen. That matter of inconsistency, this is what really causes confusion in the mindset. That inconsistency happens in the house first. When it happens in the house, when the father is a hajj, yet when his son wants to go to hajj, he's too young for it. When a mother wears hijab, yet when the daughter wants to wear hijab, no, she's too young for it. And then what happens is, this is what I say the main issue in raising a child, is that when you bring this girl, this poor girl, my God, sometimes you realize what's happening on this Facebook. You get on this Facebook and you see pictures of girls that are 5 years old, that their parents are dressing them up as if they're getting married that night. Putting makeup on their face, nail polish, but then at the age of 9, come and wear hijab. How is this going to happen? Of course she's not going to comprehend it. Imam Ali alayhi salam says, one who is used on a certain way will grow old practicing that same way. When that child, you do not implement religion from the beginning in his heart, you do not show him and set the perfect example for him, he won't be able to understand and accept it. True? When you preach to him that, you know what, you need to have a good time right now, you're still young. I mean, there's a reason why Rasulullah said, let him live his childhood until he's 7. Why is it sometimes we make our children grow old more than they deserve to be old? At that age, at the age of 7 or at the age of 5, that girl that you start painting her face with makeup and putting nail polish on her, what you're doing is that you're taking away that innocence. That innocence needs to stay there. If it doesn't happen, then obviously she won't accept anything later on. She won't be able to comprehend that. Why now do I need to cover my head? Or I need to cover my face? So that inconsistency that we have inside our houses, what's happening is that it's traveling outside. When it's traveling outside, and this is one of the main issues that we face, is that there isn't one spokesperson who speaks on the behalf of the community. And this is what happens when there is, for example, a protest, when there's a julus, when there is any program, when our Prophet is being attacked, yet nobody knows how to react. It gets to the point, believe it or not, I think when that movie was done about the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when that movie was done, a lot of the youths came up to me and they said, you know what, Sheikh, we don't even know how to react. Why? Because we do not have discipline. We do not have a certain order in order for us to be able to face, in order for us to be able to advance, in order for us to be able to speak. Such issues are not a joke. By God, that attack on the Prophet ﷺ might have been just the beginning, just like it was back in the days and 10 and 20 years ago, when it started with Salman Rushdie and so forth. So these things are all just setting a foundation for what? Basically wiping out that holiness we have towards our figures, such as the Prophet ﷺ and the Ahlul Bayt. And unfortunately, one of the saddest things I've heard, two extremes. An extreme that went, and obviously those two, the sad part is always those two extremes that they get a chance on public media. This is the sad part, and it's as if the public media, they insist on concentrating on those two extremes. An extreme that went to the point to say, you know what? No, the Prophet was extremely merciful and nice, and we just need to sit down and pray for them, may Allah guide them. And then another extreme that went, obviously what happened in some sides of the world, which was extremely wrong, and nobody admits to it. There is no middle ground. And then between those two extremes, there was another two extremes. An extreme that's saying what? Pointing the finger at what? Al-Bukhari, a Muslim. You know what? Look at the books of the Muslims. They contain, and blame them. And blame them for that movie. And another extreme agreeing to it. You know what? Yes. For God's sake, this is that movie, in my opinion, it hit more than 10 birds with one stone. Split the ummah, split the unity of the Muslims, and then show those extremes that came out. Some of them came out and started saying that no, if you were to protest against the movie, you need to curse one of the wives of the Prophet. How is this relevant to the movie? But again, it all starts with the inconsistency of how we make things, and how we preach things and how we act. The second type of upraising the child is the indirect type of upraising the child, meaning what? Setting a role model for the child. Always being the example in the house for that child, in order for him to understand, and in order for him to relate, so he can see. He can always look at a living role model right in front of him. And that goes into two. One, applying the fact that you, as a role model, will apply your deen and your akhlaq at its best. Because raising a child has to do with raising him and educating him. True? Raising him is more important than educating him. Educating him has to do with his external knowledge, meaning what? That's something that will affect him on an external level. So that's education. He will get education sooner or later in the academic system. Yet raising him, what you're doing is that you're working on his soul. So imagine a person comes out and he's educated, worth a PhD, an academic, yet no akhlaq and manners and ethics. That's dangerous. Yet if he had the akhlaq, the manners, the ethics, and then he combines it with knowledge, it's amazing. True, Habib ibn Mudahir salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi once asked, Imam Ali alayhi salam asked Habib ibn Mudahir, was on the battle of Siffin. He told him, "Oh Habib, what decorates a man?" Habib ibn Mudahir replied, "Oh Ali, what decorates a man are three." He said, "What are they?" He said, "Knowledge, patience, and courage." And look at those three characteristics in a man. And by God, they decorate him. This is what really decorates a man. Not a haircut, or the way he dresses, or anything, but these are the three main characteristics that decorates a man. And unfortunately, I wish every girl looks for those three characteristics nowadays. And every man looks for the characteristics of a religious girl. See, they say back in the days, every boy wanted a car, and every girl wanted a Barbie. Nowadays, every boy wants a Barbie, and every girl wants a nice car. It's true. It's the vice versa. It's not like there anymore. Now, those characteristics are the things that which actually decorate a man. Those things that decorate a man, they really make him a man in somebody's eyes. And there are other things that obviously would decorate a woman, and they would make her an ultimate woman in somebody's eyes. And this is why we say that this is what you look for in terms of marriage. Unfortunately, what happens in terms of marriage is that as soon as that youth comes, or somebody comes and proposes to somebody's daughter, the father, the first question he asks him, what do you have? Are you able to support her? Are you able to open up a house? Are you able? What are these questions relevant to marriage? You know, somebody might tell me, what are you speaking about, Sheikh? Now, of course they're relevant. How is he? They're going to starve to death. No, nobody starves to death. Don't worry. Secondly, why don't you ask him about his deen? They say, no, alhamdulillah, he prays and he fasts. One of my teachers, I remember, one time a person came to him, they said, Sheikh, please find me a wife. He said, okay, khair, inshallah. He said, I'm religious, by the way. I pray and I fast. He said, that means you're not religious. So what do you mean? He said, these are your wajibs. So that praying and fasting is not enough. And this is the problem, is that no, alhamdulillah, we asked him, he prays and he fasts. No, that's not enough. Is he an effective person in the community? Because this will all affect on his children. Ask, investigate about his deen, mustahabbat. How many of us sit down and have an intellectual conversation with a spouse or somebody that's going to propose for your daughter, or the vice versa? Sit down, test his knowledge, his religion, understand that is he able to affect your daughter or your son on a religious level? Will they be able to carry on a good conversation? Because if they're not compatible in terms of talking, then obviously problems will happen. They won't be able to communicate. So the three things that decorate a man are knowledge, patience, and courage. Then Imam Ali alayhi salam said, yes, Habib, and by God, they're all present in you. But there's still one. He said, then what is it, O Ali? He said, martyrdom. And that decorates him more. So imagine those characteristics that are combined. Sometimes the father needs to resemble them in the house. He needs to be able to be a reflection of the likeness of Ahlul Bayt. True? Or the companions that were with Ahlul Bayt. Now remember, if you look into the stories, the life stories of our scholars, you would realize how some of them, they manifested the akhlaq of Ahlul Bayt. The manners, the knowledge, the courage, everything in Ahlul Bayt. Why? Because they've realized that they need to be a perfect role model. Imam Khomeini, Quddis Sirru al-Sharif, one time asked his son, he told him, who is your role model? He said, my role model is you. He said, you're wrong, then you'll never get to my level. So what do you mean? He said, I put my role model as Ali ibn Abi Talib, and therefore I became a marja'. Then you need to put your model Rasulullah or Imam al-Hasan or Imam al-Hussein in order for you to become like one of them. Or like one of their companions. True? So one needs to always set a high goal, a true role model, and this is one of the main key points, true, on another hand. Is that what? Is that a role model, don't always show the child that you are the role model. Psychologically speaking, what's happened to a lot of the communities here, who migrated from the Middle East or Africa or Asia, they migrated to this country and they were afraid to lose their children. True. Everybody's afraid to lose their children. That's true. Yet what happened is because they wanted to gain their trust, they raised their children that they are true. Meaning everything that comes from dad and mom is religion. And this is wrong. When you put that hijab on your daughter, tell her wear that hijab like Zahra alayha salam did. And that Sayyida Zainab alayhi salam did. Why? Because we're not fallible. One day we might go astray. When we go astray, they will go astray. Why? Because to them it's grandma's religion. This is what religion is about. So teach them the seerah of Ahlul Bayt. This is very important. And from this point I say, if we do not have at least weekly programs for our youths where they study the life of Ahlul Bayt, then do not expect anything out of them. There's a reason why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala provided a daughter for Rasulullah. And there is a reason why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala provided Sayyida Zainab for Imam Ali alayhi salam. In order for us to learn how to raise our daughters and our sons. And there's a reason why the details of their life, of their story, of their life, goes into the details even about how they used to eat and how they used to sit and how they used to drink and how they used to sleep, everything. So we can learn. And we can learn how to raise our children the same way. So that understanding this is extremely vital. Is that the fact that sometimes you need to set that role model as being Ahlul Bayt. The same way the companions of Ahlul Bayt, they set their role models as being Ahlul Bayt. And this is why they became companions. Ibn Sikkit was one of the scholars of grammar, of Arabic grammar. He's known. He used to teach the sons of Mutawakkil. When he used to teach the sons of Mutawakkil al-Abbasi, Mutawakkil al-Abbasi was the one who came after Ma'mun. He realized that Mutawakkil realized that his sons are mentioning things from Ahlul Bayt. So he brought Ibn Sikkit. And he asked him, he wanted to test him. So he asked him, he said, Ibn Sikkit, who do you think is better, my two sons or Hassan and Hussein? Ibn Sikkit replied back, he said, do you think your two sons are better than Hassan and Hussein? He said, by God, I think Qambar is better than you and your two sons, regardless of comparing them with Hassan and Hussein. The servant of Imam Ali is better than you and your sons. True? So basically that role model you always set for them, you will always find the result at the end. That result, obviously that child will carry your name, will carry your culture, will carry the family name, he will be effective. People, when they look at your child, they will look at you. Is that, were you successful enough in raising this child or not? And this is exactly what happened with Ahlul Bayt. Ahlul Bayt, Bani Hashim in general, those characteristics they possessed at the end of the day, be it honor, courage, eloquence, they all had it by nature in them. And if you do not find it by nature, then know that it comes to them because of the law of genetics, meaning that they married from outside. Those characteristics that they have in them, they all reflect on their children. One of the sons of Imam al-Hassan salawatullahi wa salamu alayh, his name, his name was Amr ibn al-Hassan. Amr ibn al-Hassan was one of the children that was captured and was taken to the court of Yazid. When they entered the court of Yazid Ahlul Bayt, when they were taken as hostages, Yazid was sitting down, he looked at Amr ibn al-Hassan. In another narration, his name was Abdullah ibn al-Hassan. Anyways, the point is, he looks at him and he said, who are you? He said, my name is Amr ibn al-Hassan. He said, how old are you? He said, I'm 7. He said, I have my son here, he's almost your age. Do you want to wrestle him? Imagine, look at the reply of that child and realize what that upraising a child makes a difference. And then he looks at him. He said, do you want to wrestle him? Amr ibn al-Hassan replies back by saying what? He said, you know what? I have the shackles in my hands and I've been taken on a long trip from Karbala to Sham. But I'll even give you a better solution. Give him a knife and give me a knife. If he can, let us fight. If he kills me, I'll follow my forefathers. And if I kill him, he'll follow his forefathers. Yazid ibn Muawiyah looked at him and he said, this is a reply that only one from Bani Hashim can say. A serpent does not give birth except a serpent. So understand that sometimes that eloquence, that the type of a prestige that child will gain is obviously as a result of upraising that child in a good environment. In an environment where he learns. In an environment where he's in constant reflecting. In an environment that is always teaching him. And offering him chances. Opening up gates for him. True, the same way you will realize that they were the children and the youths around Ali ibn Abi Talib and around Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and around the Imam Hussein alayhi salam that made a difference. You will realize that there was a good amount of youths, be it Qasim alayhi salam or Ali al-Akbar alayhi salam or Abbas alayhi salam or even the sons of Ja'far alayhi salam, the sons of Abdullah ibn Ja'far, true, or the sons of Muslim on one narration, according to one narration. These made a difference because they were affected by this. When they are affected by this, I mean, imagine an answer such from a person like Ali al-Akbar alayhi salam on the road to Karbala. His father asks him. He asks his father. He realized that his father, Imam Hussein alayhi salam, teared a little. He said, "Father, what is wrong?" He said, "I know that we're approaching Karbala. And since we're approaching Karbala, this is the land where we'll be slaughtered on." He said, "Father, it makes no difference whether we approach death, whether we fall on death, or death falls on us. It's the same." I mean, look at that energy inside that youth. And the same thing happened with one of the children of the companions of Imam Hussein salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi. One of the son of Habib ibn Mawahir salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi. That companion of Imam Hussein who actually came back in Saffin to Imam Ali. And he said, "Oh Ali, you told me that martyrdom decorates a man and I will get it. But I am still alive right now and the war is over." Then Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam started tearing. And when he started tearing, he said, "Oh Habib, the martyrdom that you will attain is not with me on the land of Saffin. You will attain that martyrdom which will be equal to 1,000 martyrdoms with my son Imam Hussein. In Karbala," the narration says that Habib was sitting eating with his wife and his son. And the messenger of Imam Hussein came, knocked on the door. When he came, knocked on the door, Habib said to his wife, if I'm not mistaken, "This is the messenger of Imam Hussein calling me to Karbala." He gets up with excitement and opens the door. He receives the letter from Imam Hussein. He opens it up. He realizes that Imam Hussein is asking for his help, for his support. He closes the letter, kisses it, puts it on his head, and then he goes out for the nusra, for the victory of Imam, for the support of Imam Hussein. He reaches to the land of Karbala, and what honor does Habib get? He realizes that Imam Hussein alayhi salam is waiting for him, keeping a flag for Habib. At that point, Sayyida Zainab alayhi salam looked at Ali al-Akbar and she said, "Oh, my nephew Ali, what just happened? Why did Imam Hussein smile?" He said, "Because Habib came for our support." She said, "Ahlan marhaban bi Habib." At that point, Habib reached Imam Hussein alayhi salam. Look at those honors. Called them, "Oh, Habib, ya Habib. Oh, my beloved Habib, oh, my friend Habib." Habib ibn Mudahir said, "Oh Hussein, give me a chance to salute Sayyida Zainab." Sayyida Zainab alayha salam stood behind the tent, wore the abaya of Sayyida Zahra. And Habib said, "Assalamu alayki ya Zainab." Zainab replies back, "Wa alayka assalam ya Habib." And then Habib ibn Mudahir goes back. He manifests the utmost level of loyalty. On the 10th of Muharram, Habib ibn Mudahir, when he took permission to fight, he attacked the battlefield. Even though he was an elderly man, he was an old man, he killed a good number. When he fell down as a martyr, Imam Hussein rushed to him, carried his head, and he said, "Oh Habib, ya Habib." And the son of Habib ibn Mudahir was a child in Kufa. When the heads entered Kufa, he realized that the head of his father was being carried by one of the horsemen. He followed the horseman until he got to the castle. He looked at the head, the horseman looked at him and he said, the man on the horse looked at him and he said, "What is wrong with you? What is your problem?" He said, "This is the head of my father Habib. The narration says that that child waited until he grew, and then he realized who was the killer of his father again, and he took the revenge of his father. That child who was electrified by the love of Hussein, and tonight it is the night of the children and the youths that were electrified by the love of Hussein. You understand that on the land of Karbala, after the companions, the Bani Hashim came forward. Some narrations say that it was Ali al-Akbar who was the first martyr. Yet other narrations say no, it was Abdullah ibn Muslim ibn Aqil and Aoun ibn Abdullah ibn Ja'far and Muhammad ibn Abdullah ibn Ja'far. Abdul Rahman ibn Aqil, Ja'far ibn Aqil and Abdullah ibn Aqil. These were the sons of Aqil and the sons of Abdullah ibn Ja'far and one of the sons of Muslim. Unfortunately, when I looked into history to be able to find out about Aoun and Muhammad, is that do we have details for their martyrdom? And I called my teacher and I asked him that question. One time what he said is that Sayyida Zainab alayha salam, the sacrifice of her son, to her it was very insignificant in front of the sacrifice of Hussein. And I asked that Sayyida Zainab alayha salam, is that you looked at your two sons being slaughtered on the land of Karbala, yet the only thing in your mind was what was happening to Hussein and Abbas alayhi salam. And I look and I imagine Sayyida Zainab alayhi salam standing on that land of Karbala. Does she call out for her sons? No. Does she call out for anybody else? No, she calls out for Abbas. She calls out for Abbas to come to rescue. And those sons of Sayyida Zainab alayha salam, when she presented them to Imam Hussein, she brought them and stood in front of Imam Hussein. And she said, oh, my brother Hussein, these are my two sons, take them as a sacrifice. Imam Hussein alayhi salam looked at them and he said, oh Sayyida, oh my sister Zainab, I do not want you to weep over your sons. She said, oh Hussein, note that these sons are a sacrifice to you, and let them attack the enemies of Allah. At that point, Abbas alayhi salam was standing, looking at every mother bringing her son and presenting him to Imam Hussein. Abbas alayhi salam stood there. He looked at Sayyida Zainab and he said, oh sister Zainab, what are you waiting for? The narration says that he took off his amama and he tied it around his neck and he said, take me with this to my brother Hussein. And I asked Sayyida Zainab that when Abbas was lying on the ground and you were calling out for him, would he listen? Or would he come to your rescue? Those were the Bani Hashim who sacrificed one after the other until it came to the sons of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون وسيعلم الذين ظلموا آل محمد أي منقلب ينقلبون والعاقبة للمتقين. اللهم كن لوليك الحجة بن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرضك طوعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم عجل فرجه وسهل مخرجه واجعلنا من أنصاره وأعوانه والذابين عنه والمستشهدين بين يديه والطالبين بثارات جده الحسين تحت لوائه. وصل اللهم على محمد وآله الطاهرين.